Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I welcome you to the Kosmos conference to commemorate the 250th birthday of Alexander von Humboldt here at Humboldt-Universität to Berlin. Those from outside of Berlin, I hope you had a great journey getting here despite the unpleasant weather conditions outside. We will have a hot conference, both in terms of what's going on inside the building and also with respect to temperatures outside in the coming days. I hope that you're going to enjoy this conference, this science festival, this celebration. We want to make it a birthday party as well as a science fair, trade fair, and you're fully invited to engage with everything that we have been preparing, and it would be great to see you in those other formats that we are trying out here, be it the Treasure Quest or the Bar Camp or whatsoever. I have been pestering you a little with emails over the last week, so all the information in principle is there if you read it. If not, check with me, and I'll happily explain it to you again, yeah? Or some of the coaches. We have on this conference actually more than 30, if they are all there, it's 34 student coaches or facilitators which help us run this conference. They are an integral part. They have prepared themselves with 2 workshops for taking you on board for this treasure hunt on something that's somehow related to the Sustainable Development Goal you have signed in. All of those student facilitators, would you just stand up once so that we can see you here? I mean, I know that not all of you are here, but just so. This is the team. It's normally not the place to thank people for organizing a conference when you start the conference. I make an exemption from the rule here, and this is because the person that played such a crucial role in developing this conference and bringing it on stage is Anne Dombrowski from the Integrated Research Institute on Human Environmental Systems, Transformation of Human Environmental Systems, the IRE thesis. She has been working together with me and other team members for more than a year to get this on stage here, and unfortunately on Monday, due to health reasons, she had to quit that, and she can't be with us, which is sad for her. And everything that will go on over the next 2.5 days somehow, we should thank Anne Dombrowski for these things to happen. Now you're seeing here on this evening the Icebreaker. I think this is a format that is very used in the science community where I am in mostly, which is glaciology. All the glaciology conferences have an icebreaker on the first evening, obviously. Alexander von Humboldt never has been to those places where you would need an icebreaker, but especially when it's as hot as it is today in Berlin, we really need an icebreaker. So we have this icebreaker here tonight, and as a conference opening venue, and we will have the presentation here by our speaker tonight, and after that, just see what's happening. And for the icebreaker tonight, we have invited Beatrice Crona from the Stockholm Resilience Institute to join us here in Berlin. And I have to tell you something, you know, Fridays for Future, and there's a lot of people at the moment that think about what can we do about climate change? And then in many universities now in Germany, we start collecting signatures from scientists that say, okay, if it's not really a very long trip within Europe, let's just not fly, just take a boat or a bus or a train or something. And then Beatrice sent me the invoice of her trip, and I felt, oh, what she's doing, because she came overnight with Flixbus from Stockholm. without flying. Actually, Beatrice holds an MSc in marine ecotoxicology from Stockholm University, and she has done her PhD at the same university in systems ecology on a topic which is mangrove ecology and marine governance. And since then, somehow, I think everything she does relates to the question, so how does sustainability and marine sciences go together, or marine usages are going together? She has been a postdoc at the Center of the Study of Institutional Diversity at Arizona State University, which focused on adaptive governance and science policy interactions, also related to water. That has been 2007, 2008. She became assistant professor at Stockholm Resilience Center, and I believe also at Stockholm University. She has been an elected member of the Swedish Young Academy from 2012 to 2017. Since 2012, she's an associate professor at Stockholm Resilience Center and Stockholm University. And also, she's executive director and leader of the research program Global Economic Dynamics and the Biosphere of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Beatrice Crona's work has been featured a lot, obviously, in all of her high-ranked peer-reviewed science papers, but moreover, in various popular science and public news media channels, such as in the Environment magazine or in The Guardian. So she's a member of an expert group on trade and marine resources, which is coordinated by International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development, and it's in collaboration with World Economic Forum. So she's really somewhere at this place between economics and sustainability, or economics and resources. And therefore, we felt this is great if she's trying to bring together. Why are we here commemorating 250 years of Alexander von Humboldt, but then really opening this conference with something that opens the topic of sustainability research and the sustainable development goals to all of us. So Beatrice, it's great that you made it to come here by bus. Welcome on stage, and we are looking forward to your talk.
Wow, I didn't remember I had done half of those things. I'm not sure where you got that CV from, but that's great. I'm sure you're on board now. Anyway, hello. It's nice to be here. It's very hot. I didn't expect it to be quite this hot, but it's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to try and get this started so I can see how much time I have. And I'm going to start by confessing something that I've never done an icebreaker before. In fact, I'd never heard of having an icebreaker at a conference. So, but, you know, you got to try new things, launch yourself into novelty. I didn't really know what to talk about, though. And so words like exciting and inspiring were used when I spoke to Christoph on the phone before the summer. And it made me a bit nervous. I couldn't really back out at that point. But here I am. I'm not sure that I'm going to be neither exciting nor inspiring, but bear with me for 30 minutes or so. And given that I had completely free reins, really, which is thank you, I wanted to take this time to put together, I guess, some of the thoughts that I think we all invariably go around with, and they bubble up from time to time. They're not really necessarily scientific. They're not really research questions. I would say this is more ponderings from me about where we are and where I think we might be heading. And of course, I'm going to start here because this conference is in honor of Alexander von Humboldt. And I'll admit that I didn't know all that much about him before I was asked to speak here. A little bit, but not very much. But I gather from the program that there will be a lot of sort of tributes to him or to his science at this conference. So many of you in here are probably more experts than I am. So you'll have to bear with me. Because I couldn't help start an icebreaker here with the obvious fact that in his scientific endeavor, he laid the foundations of so many of the things that we in sustainability science today take for granted. The long-term monitoring programs, that's a picture trying to show the meteorological monitoring programs that kind of stem from his long-term monitoring that he set up. Some people even say he may have been the first to describe human-induced climate change. I don't know if that's true. But he also resurrected the Greek word of cosmos, as this conference, and under which he sought to unify many of these diverse branches of science to understand the world. And his Cosmos lecture, I guess it was in the Senate chamber of this university, is where it all started. But it also gave rise to this multi-volume treatise, for which I think he's most widely known, for which I knew him, all with an aspiration to facilitate this holistic perspective of the universe. And this expose, I think, is what qualifies him as the forefather of systems thinking, something that's at the heart of sustainability science today. But it wasn't always the case, I would say. Only like 13, 15 years ago or so, when I was defending my thesis, there I am, trying to defend, sustainability science was still a field of struggle in some ways. For those of us who ventured into it, there wasn't always a clear, straightforward career path. And there was no research school in sustainability science in any of the universities that I attended. And I fought a really hard battle with my half-time examination committee to stray outside of conservation ecology and ecotoxicology, and to start to include humans and to begin to apply, in that case, social network analysis, to understand the social and ecological connections that were seen, at least, to be driving the unsustainable behavior and the outcomes that I was observing in these small-scale fisheries in East Africa, where I was working at the time. And the application now of social network analysis and network theory to understand social ecological system is a thriving field of its own, and that's super exciting to see. But it wasn't then. And back then, 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't also all that easy always to try to publish your transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary work. Many of the journals then were not really keen to take on these multidisciplinary articles, which were trying to mix things, like in my case, then sociology, network theory, and ecology. But even like natural science and economics was not, in some ways, that easy. And but this has changed. And I think we look at the field now, it shows that it's a remarkable and really steady mix of different disciplines in there. I think, actually, you might not be even been able to see this, the writing there. It's kind of small. But the point here is that now sustainability science as a field is much more established. And I think we're not really suffering from these things anymore, which is great. This is taken actually from a paper which is back in 2011. So I think we may even have more disciplines if we do a pie chart now. But these same authors, they also showed how the number of unique authors and publications over time have really increased. And they've mapped it here against some of the sort of key events in the sustainability field that has happened. But what I think is perhaps most exciting is if we look at this, which is from the same paper. It's a geographic distribution of sustainability science publications. So the geographic distribution of the authors and the institutions behind them. And that, I think, is super exciting, because if you look at this, obviously the darker the country, the more publications. But it's really interesting to note that places like Brazil, China, India, and even South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Turkey, if you look here, are big contributors to sustainability science, and that's quite unusual. In many other fields, we see a dominance of Anglo-Saxon countries, and so I think this makes sustainability science quite usual and a nice field to be working in. But while sustainability science has definitely grown, and systems thinking, the way that Alexander von Humboldt was, promoting it, is becoming more mainstream within sustainability science, I think, this systems perspective, I am still sad to say, is not really permeating the rest of society. It's not really permeating into policy. where ministries in so many countries are still pursuing issues in silos without recognizing that it's integrated nature that we need to look at it. Just an example in the field that I'm kind of getting into now, which is food production, trade, and human and environmental health. Those need to be treated together, but very often they're not. And also the bulk of mainstream economics are still pursued, I think, in a very linear way, which disregards drastically declining resources, for example. And as a field, you could critique me if I say this. There may be some economists in the room. I know there's one. But I think as a field, they haven't really found a way to stand united behind the need to incorporate negative social externalities, for example, despite extensive research on this topic in sustainability science and in ecological economics. And as late as this summer, so like only at the beginning of July, we saw Nick Stern, who is perhaps not your most conventional economist, but nonetheless, come out in The Guardian and again have to explain that the need for a carbon tax and to end harmful subsidies. And this is 2019. But even though it's been around for some time now, sustainability science is still, I think, in many ways, by a lot of people, thought of as a young field. I took this definition of the PNAS website for their sustainability section. And it says an emerging field of research dealing with the interactions between natural and social systems. And perhaps many of you in here, I know certainly when I ventured into this field, I was drawn to this perceived new field with the hope that it would, I thought, revolutionize how society was going to pursue development. And back in the mid-19th century, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a famous American philosopher, I don't know if any of you know him, but he called Alexander von Humboldt a scientific revolutionary. And today, I think, as we look at ourselves in our field of sustainability science, I feel that we all need to critically look at ourselves in our field and reflect on whether this also applies to us, whether we are revolutionary enough, or we're perhaps not even revolutionary at all, some of us. And if we're not revolutionary enough, what can we do? What is it that needs to change? I say this because in my own scientific career, I have found myself coming up against this question more and more often as I go to work. And I've gone from working on ecology of small-scale fishers in East Africa, particularly mangrove ecology, as you heard from Christoph. But I realized after a while that it's not just about ecology, and it's about the people, of course, you'll say, the people and their interactions with each other and with nature. And this was the first realization for me to draw me out of my ecological box, and it led me to pursue network analysis, for example, to understand these social ecological dynamics that I was observing. And eventually, drawing on sociology and network science to understand human behavior, this led me to realize that these local fishery systems were nested in much, much larger systems of trade, international global trade, which were largely overriding the local actors, which I were observing. And this once again forced me a step even further away from the ecological box and forced me to engage with how international trade drives local resource use and governance outcomes. And also, more recently, what ends up on our plate. But 3 years ago, I came to this realization that you could say rather obvious, perhaps quite late, but nonetheless a realization in my work that many of the social ecological dynamics that I was studying were going to be, or that I was investigating, were probably going to be superseded by climate change dynamics. So what did this mean? Was I going to change into climate science? No, of course not. But if there is one feature that has run through my career, it's systems thinking. So I tried to think about how I could use this one talent that I have, and I came to the conclusion that if we look at the world as a complex system, and if we draw on the really brilliant insights by people like Donella Meadows and many others as well, who conceptualize change in such systems as being activated through leverage points, then to me, the financial sector was the last big leverage point that sustainability science hadn't really tapped into. Or at least we could do more. So with little background in climate science, actually none, and absolutely no background in finance, along with some crazy but very dedicated colleagues, some who were actually both finance people and or system scientists, by the way, I launched myself in this research project to try and link planetary scale tipping points to the financial system. And more specifically, we've been trying to highlight how the financial system affects and is actually a key driver of society's movement, sadly, closer and closer to some of these tipping points, such as the Amazonian deforestation, which I'm sure everyone is on everyone's mind at the moment, but also boreal forest degradation. But I'm not mentioning this, sorry, I'm not mentioning this to, in any way boast about how our brave new science. No, the fact is I don't even know if my work with the financial sector is revolutionary, or if it will be successful and have the kind of major systemic impact that I would wish that it could have. And I don't know if it will be as disruptive of the system of money allocation as I wish it would be. But or if by working with the existing system, you could say I'm not really disruptive or revolutionary at all. But I believe that it's my best chance at affecting change rapidly by using my skills and my specific competencies. And I'll get back to that. But this brings me to the point of speed, because hopefully I think we can all agree that we need a transformation fairly quickly. Because, and here is the cynical pun of today, sorry, the fact that this is an icebreaker session and the ice is literally breaking. This is a picture from the Antarctic where there's thoughts that there are unprecedented large ice sheet that may in the near future be breaking off. This is the Arctic, where we've had unprecedented fires for longer and more severe than any other year, at least measured before. And this is the Greenland ice sheet, which is melting 4 times faster than we had initially predicted. And this is taken back in August 1st of this year. We see massive meltwater rivers on top of these ice sheets growing out into the oceans. And 2 people, Ramanathan and Yangjang Zhu, a couple of years back, published this results of the IPCC's own models they used to show that the risk of reaching 1.5 degrees warming already in 10 years, if we continue today, not as we are today, not the 25 years that the IPCC officially stated. And I spoke to Johan Rockström, and he claimed that many of the climate researchers that he meets now agree with Ramanathan and Yangjang Zhu that this might be the case. So I think that I'm not alone when I feel like there are signs of things happening, definitely, of awareness rising, but a systemic transformation to a low-carbon world, and one which stays within the planetary boundaries, is not happening as fast as I would like to see it. So what can this conference do? Well, I'm now going to give you my proverbial gauntlet that I'm going to throw down before you in advance of this 3 days of scientific jousting that you're going to have. So you can see this, in other words, is my challenge to you, or to us all, within the sustainability science community. First, to identify what some of the key impediments towards transformation are that lie in our way. Now, of course, there are many, so I can't go through all of those here, nor will I probably be the right person, nor will I understand and identify all of them. But I'd like to flag one, which I think is often quite subtle, so subtle, in fact, that many times I don't even think about it, but it's structurally fundamental in many ways, and it's gender. Now, I'm not a gender scholar at all. In fact, I've been critiqued several times for not having more focus on gender in my work. But I can't help to see that in many different fields show that there are actually real observable differences between men and women that are of relevance to sustainable development. So we see in general randomized samples, for example, which there are quite a few studies out there. Men are often less likely to believe in climate change. Not you in here, of course, but many men out there in general. Or to be less well-informed or more skeptical about it. And in the corporate sector, which I'm ending up working with, more and more these days, the likelihood of voluntary climate change disclosure of firms, for example, increases with the percentage of women on the boards. Now, we can discuss what the causal mechanisms of that might be, but it's still an interesting pattern. And similar work shows that gender diverse boards are associated with higher quality sustainability reports. Again, what's the causal mechanisms? That needs to be looked into more, but these are interesting things to reflect on. And in economics, there's a multitude of different studies of consumer behavior that show that men, to different degrees, but generally are less likely to consume green products. In Sweden, where I come from, for example, when it comes to cars, women outnumber men in supporting reduction in vehicle use and increased options for sustainable transport options. So it's clear that such gender differences can have bearing on, for example, how cities are developed and for who, but also much more general policies, how they're implemented in general and which policies are brought up on the table. And it most likely also affects how large amounts of capital are allocated, because in the finance industry, where I've ended up being a lot of the time the last few years, it's very dominated by men. But, so broadly speaking, I think we can say that gender differences are likely to play a role in determining speed and direction of development by reflecting the worldview and vision of those that have the power. So I think we need to look at this more in our sustainability attempts. But I'm not trying to denigrate all men, of course not. In fact, why do many men, perhaps not in this room, but out there, still want to pursue things like fast cars or other things? Well, more and more research is showing that it's because of commercial messaging, which feeds into culturally ingrained constructions of masculinity, for example, and women are as much part of reinforcing that as anyone. So it's no gender is to blame here, but I think a stronger recognition of these gender differences and their interaction with power and agency is warranted. And it can have profound, I think, implications for our ability as a society to transition. So hot. Second, to offer not just critical thinking and description of problems, but to reach further and to formulate actual plausible solutions and positive narratives. Challenge number 2. I know that we as scientists have traditionally shied away from this, but I think that the time has come for us to be more bold. Problem description, I think, is not in itself enough now. We need to take a step outside of our comfort zone and get into the solution space. Time is short, and we, I think, are as well placed to identify possible solution as any other sphere out there, or at least to offer up these ideas for political and democratic debate, but probably best done in partnerships with various parts of society. But you may be thinking, and you may be right, sustainability science community, it maybe isn't the right bunch to be thinking about solutions. And I thought that at first, and then I thought again, and I thought, well, no, actually, to be honest, maybe it's the older generation of sustainability scientists that are not the right bunch. But I see a lot of young faces in the audience, so that's good. Because maybe people like me who've been in the game for 20 years or so have been too conditioned by the norms that say that we need to do the kind of science, prioritize the kind of science that can be published in top-tier journals only. And we've not really spent enough time training ourselves to think outside of the box, or at least thinking about how we can change the system to do both top-notch science and science that can be actionable and really affect change. And I don't mean to be glib, because being solutions-oriented in your research, I think, is very easy to say and probably really hard to do. And I, for one, have built a career on describing problems the more complex, the better. And I'm really merely voicing a concern, a real concern, and a challenge that I see, even though I don't have a straight answer for how to go about doing it, really. But I want to just say also, of course, we should never give up on problem description. As Adam Sachs, who is he's a climate activist, but he writes some really thought-provoking stuff. So check out his blogs if you want. But he says that, and I agree with him, that some of our most important thinking happens while developing the problem statement. And the better the problem statement, the richer our responses. So I'm not saying we should leave problem description, just to branch out. And this leads me to my final plea or challenge, to move beyond a vision of hope and shift our attention to the courage that's also needed by all of us, I think, to challenge existing norms and conventions. It's courage, not hope, I think, that will be needed by our leaders to break the confines of the maladaptive system that we as a society have developed. And it's courage, not hope, that I think we will all need in our daily lives to challenge our immediate surroundings, whether it's, saying no to a particular kind of food that you don't think is sustainable, or refusing to promote consumption to celebrate birthdays and Christmas and things like these. These are small actions, but they all require courage to go against very ingrained norms and traditions. And it's courage, not hope, that guides today's young forerunners like Greta, but also others, and which has allowed her, I think, and many other young people, perhaps some of you, I don't know, to defy rules and conventions and to stand up and speak out for what they think must happen and the change that they want to see. And I think that as adults, as scientists, we have to be equally courageous. In 1972, the Club of Rome presented their first report, Limits to Growth, as you see there. And its foundational model has been heavily critiqued for its gloomy message of a finite world, which eventually was perceived to not have been borne out, and therefore was scorned by a lot of people as crying wolf. And this is back in the 70s, but when I entered the field of sustainability science in the 1990s, I felt like the memory of this hung very heavy over the emergent field of sustainability science. And my 20 years in academia, I've consistently felt that this fear of scorn or fear of dismissal has strongly flavored the advice that was given to me by my senior scientists or colleagues and also professional communicators, that, don't be too gloomy. Be sure to convey a message of hope, because if you don't, at the end, people are going to disengage, whether it's the private sector or policymakers or the general public. But I think that in our attempts to engage and stave off critique from those who are not wanting to hear about a finite world, we may have been just a little bit too hopeful. And I think lulling those listening to us convey our science into a false sense that things will just be okay, that somehow, somewhere, someone is going to fix it. And this has undermined the sense of urgency and the challenges that we face, and led us to a point where I think now people are sensing an extreme urgency and a kind of a rude awakening for many parts of society that haven't really thought about this before. And I think, of course, this is sparking pockets of action, which is really good to see. But unfortunately, and I've noticed this in the last few years that I've been out speaking in various places, also a widespread anxiety, which is the risk of causing apathy if we don't find a way to challenge that anxiety, to actually do something. At least that's what I'm being told by psychologists, which I've also had the privilege of interacting with recently. So, back to my third and final challenge to you all at this conference, which is to let's formulate our insights and messages with this balance between hope and courage that you need to take the science and actually make it actionable everywhere in society. So in closing, you might think, why was I talking about this windy road back to Kosmos? Because what I've tried to illustrate here is this long, detour that I felt like we've taken from systemic thinking, which was there in the 19th century, represented by people like Alexander von Humboldt, and via these really siloed approaches in academia, but also in policy and this detaching business and economics from the biosphere, to now painstakingly having to come back and find our way back to a more holistic systems view of the world, Cosmos, not just for academia, but for the entire society. The question is, can we do it in time to save the planet? Can we do it in time to land spaceship Earth safely on the planet, as I know Johan Rockström would say if he was here today? And I want to believe that we can, but I think it is going to take innovative, out-of-the-box ideas and solutions-oriented thinking from us as well, and hard work by us as scientists, of course, and a continuation of partnerships between us in academia and other parts of society. But having said that, I wish you all a very productive conference, and I hope you leave Berlin inspired to use the next decade to let your science drive change and transformation in whatever novel ways that you think is useful and that speaks to your talents and your skills. Thank you.
You realize that Beatrice already left the stage. And this is actually the tradition of an icebreaker, that we don't discuss it because we would want to head for the drinks downstairs, I believe. But, well, we need a few more minutes, I believe, because you have seen that an imaginary Baron, Alexander von Humboldt, somehow has joined the conference. And what I understand is that he's still around somewhere and would want to take us on a bit of a journey. And we see how this is going on, and just let yourself being guided by what is going on stage. And after that, I hope we'll meet you downstairs. We all meet downstairs for a drink, and then you should discuss the science with Beatrice Crona on the tables there. I leave the stage for Baron Alexander von Humboldt.